And Helfand of Endeavor Health. He is the Associate Chief Science Officer. Brian, thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you for inviting me.
So, for those who don't know, Endeavor Health is a health system based in Evanston, Illinois, just outside of Chicago, with about 2,000 hospital beds across 9 hospitals, served by 10,000 providers. So, Brian, as the Associate Chief Science Officer, I'm sure you have a lot of things on your plate. Today, we're going to talk about clinical trials, specifically how you're working to improve access to clinical trials and the latest treatments outside of major medical centers in major cities. So I'll hand it over to you. What's going on with clinical trials at Endeavor Health?
Yeah, so we're in a really unique area, and I think our issues are uniform really throughout a lot of the country. We're in Chicago; it's a major city. We are part of 8 different academic institutions in Chicago, and it's finding our footprint and remaining competitive. We personally are part of a large network that, as you said, we have 9 hospitals in our system. We continue to expand. We service 4.1 million patients. And so, how do you keep patients in the system? How do you use clinical trials as one of those main attractions that not only gives the care that I think patients deserve, but also attracts patients, and from a kind of a business minded sense, how are we retaining that and not losing those patients to other sites where they believe may have different trials, different technologies, etc. So that's really where clinical trial space is. We want to, and certainly have proven ourselves that we have the ability to offer clinical trials, the latest, greatest care, to on top of already outstanding care throughout a large hospital system.
Got it. So let's go with a concrete use case, if you wouldn't mind, walking us through. Now, I don't want to put you on the spot, so I'll give you a choice. Either patient Jane has some kind of condition, and the only treatment available for this maybe orphan disease is through a clinical trial being offered through Endeavor Health. That might be a good place to start, or starting in the story of how Endeavor Health is leveraging clinical trials to improve access and maintain market share. I'll leave it in your hands.
Yeah, I think both. We can talk about both of those because I think they're both very relevant. I do think we have 10,000 providers. Most of us are fellowship trained, really top of the game. Have believe that the best care is constantly evolving. And as you start really pushing that envelope, you move quickly into that clinical trial space because that's really going to test and offer the latest cares. Sometimes, as you brought up, as compassionate care in certain oncology cases, which I'll give an example of, to give access to treatments that patients would not otherwise have access to. And so, even in a real world example, and certainly trials that I've either witnessed or been part of, cancer trials are the lowest hanging fruit there because they're the most common, because of that space is always pushing to hopefully stomp out cancer one day. But also, whether I'm talking about cancer trials or I'm talking about other even benign conditions, ranging from psychiatry to ophthalmology to urology. There are so many clinical trials in that space. But if you're going to use a concrete example, and specifically, you have a patient, he's a 74-year-old gentleman who has a advanced prostate cancer. And, he has gone through for many, many years a lot of the traditional therapies that have involved testosterone, wiping agents out. And once you go through so many different, treatments, you kind of come to an end. There's not a lot of new things that you can offer. And as an example, he was offered a clinical trial to look at several different things. Number one, he was able to get the most advanced imaging. So that is on trial to say, hey, we can locate that tumor with the latest, greatest, kind of radio tracers in that field and really localize that cancer. And because it's a new radiotherapy or imaging technology, you can really leverage that to really localize that where the disease is and hopefully come up with treatments based on that. And then he was so happy with that result. And based on that radio tracer, he was actually able to enroll in a different trial that tagged a radiation therapy to that imaging agent so that would target and localize that treatment that much better. And so that's the kind of thing that we're really aiming for, is to say that, hey, these are not standard of care, but all of the trials that we enroll patients in have that ability to offer benefits to that patient, even though that they're not widely used or certainly in guidelines at that point. But it improves the patient care and access, and certainly the quality of care that patients get.
So, other than joining podcasts like this one, you mentioned that clinical trial of the kind you just described help increase patient enrollment. How is Endeavor leveraging its abilities to identify the appropriate clinical trials for eligible populations in order to increase patient enrollment and general market share? Of course, I guess the market share would be primarily for the target sick populations, but if there's any kind of tertiary benefits to well populations, that might also be worth mentioning.
Yeah, so I mean, we Endeavor Health is has changed names throughout time, but historically was Evanston Healthcare, much smaller operation back over 20 years ago. But it was one of the first systems to employ an electronic health record system, or EHR system. In fact, we were the beta testing site for the most common thing known as Epic. And so Epic has evolved, and certainly we have data on millions of patients for over 20 years. And as that has evolved, we have been thinking to say, hey, we want to be able to overlay different electronic programs so that we can quickly search patients for eligibility in clinical trials, and to enhance and identify those patients who would qualify. So we have that ability to look at one of the largest healthcare systems in the country and really quickly identify patients. And that's pertinent because a lot of trials can benefit the masses, but there are certain trials that are really designed for rare conditions. And so one of those issues has been that we haven't been able to identify those patients historically, but with these type of technologies, we're identifying those patients with the rare conditions and getting them in trials or
Just to
offering them.
jump in for 1 second, Brian, because I want to clarify so our listeners understand. You're saying that maybe there's only 50,000 Americans with condition Y, and maybe they're not all in Chicago. Maybe some are in Texas or Maine or Florida. And it just so happens that the biotherapeutic intervention that would treat condition Y is being offered through Endeavor and nowhere else. How do you find these patients that are not Endeavor patients but are across the country and bring them in to enroll them? Because in order to get approval by the FDA, you need a certain kind of amount of participation, and you're needing to identify these patients. Is that what you're talking about?
Yeah, I mean, it goes both ways. It goes locally, right? Because we have 4.1 million patients to now in our data set to query on an annual basis and look for people who would qualify for, rare conditions and common conditions. But we also have partnered through many different organizations, networks, but they're all electronically linked to help identify patients, kind of quicker. And a lot of this is really, when you start looking in this type of space, is in the oncology realm, the neuroscience realm, where a lot of the conditions and treatments may be more rare. So it, again, has the ability to look nationwide to
Mhm.
look for eligible patients. But a lot of this is also posted on trial sites and government sites to make people aware and practitioners aware. But really, especially internally, when certain conditions are being met, there will be flags that pop up that can help identify those patients and make the provider, the current person who's taking care of that patient, aware,
Mhm.
so that they can, refer to that trial, or at least get that patient more information.
So obviously, Epic Care Everywhere is one way to try to access different instances of Epic across the country. Does Endeavor leverage connectivity to national networks in order to try to identify patients with certain diagnoses codes that might be eligible for this sort of trial?
A lot is in motion. So nationally becomes a little bit more of a problem, if you will, just because of HIPAA and things like that. But really through the connectivity, whether that's through Epic, whether that's through, kind of organizations, whether that's the American Cancer Society, the NIH, all of that, we are part of all of those, kind of trials. And certainly the awareness of that is made possible through that.
Hmm.
I think we have a much higher success rate because when you control the dialogue in the system,
Hmm.
it makes people more aware. And so while nationally there's a huge presence, and certainly we have patients coming in all the time from other parts of the country for clinical trials. Certainly the identification, if just being frank, is currently still emphasized within our own expanded network throughout the Chicagoland area.
So, it's my understanding, Brian, that in 2025, Endeavor Health had 550 active trials across multiple specialties and 2,300 clinical trial patients that were enrolled in those trials last year. Given the complexity and the vast volume of patients and trials and details, I imagine that there's a lot of data to orchestrate. Are there any data challenges? I'm asking this, of course, because this is Healthy Data Podcast. Are there any data challenges associated with managing such a vast array of differing data sources and problems you're trying to address?
Yeah, so the amount of data, these are big data, issues, and that's awesome, because what you're really reflecting on is that we have the ability, whether we're talking about genetic data, whether we're talking about large population data, and all of the imaging and all the lab work and all the patient demographics that go into that. This is big data. There, for every patient in a trial, we estimate that there's over 1 million data points that we are constantly collecting, and that may even be a small, data, clinical trial. So, that requires a lot of backup of data, and that requires a lot of secure servers, especially in today's era where we're always concerned about information and protection at all points. And so we have, certainly huge servers that are all, kind of constantly monitored. And I don't know the details of it because I joke that our system is very much like Fort Knox. It's very hard to, kind of compromise that system. But certainly all of the necessary systems are in place, the clouds,
Mhm.
to really gather that data.
Right. It's another topic, and I guess leveraging the last few minutes of this podcast, I know that one of your goals is to increase access to clinical trials outside of major cities. So outside of Chicago, you're trying to look to get a larger catchment area. You're looking to reduce barriers to care, with transportation or hotels or food, and expand the footprint of Endeavor beyond the immediate Chicago area. Can you elaborate on what you're trying to do and how data may kind of what new data sources or what new data challenges are related to those initiatives?
So in the a classic model, and something that we initially had to overcome is that if you have a clinical trial, you have that patient come into your clinic. They often have to come in multiple times throughout the study. You have to have labs drawn, evaluated, et cetera. And so that for a lot of patients was a barrier because the just travel time alone, people didn't want to, sign up for trials because it was considered a burden. And so, certainly locally into the 4.1 million lives that we serve, that
Hmm.
we've overcome that because we have so many different, locations throughout a large system where patients can enroll. So even if you live in X part of Chicago, there's likely a clinical trial center part of Endeavor Health that you
Hmm.
can go to get your labs or to get you be seen, evaluated, et cetera. And certainly most of the trials will be offered throughout the entire system. So again, that improves access just based on location, et cetera. But then
Hmm.
we're also forward thinking, and as you said, is that our goal is that it's not only just serving the lives that we see immediately in the Chicagoland area, but it's how do we serve a greater good throughout the country as well. And so if patients are you know, identified and you're on the East Coast, so in Maryland or in New York, and they want to be part of a trial here, is that possible? And the answer is yes, because in the era of telemedicine, in the era of so much virtual healthcare, that a lot of things that we can do can be done as certainly as a follow up or at great distances away. Now, the exception for that would be if you're getting a drug delivered or something that actually requires multiple interventions and stuff like that. A lot of times you have to come in town for that, and there's no way to overcome that
Hmm.
part. But certainly, if it's a national trial, we'll help identify a center that may be, closer that can give you that in that setting, trial center.
So, if you were in a patient in New York and you were identified and needed to participate in an Endeavor trial in Chicago, would it be possible for that patient in New York to have labs or imaging done remotely, and then have those samples shipped to Chicago?
So it's not a uniform yes, because certain clinical trials depends on the sponsor or the type
Hmm.
of trial you're doing may not permit it. But for the most part, that scenario that you described is very possible and frequently done at Endeavor Health. So again, our goal is to provide that care no matter where you are,
Hmm.
and that top quality. So if it's easier and you so happen to be in New York, you can certainly get local imaging, local labs done, send over that and overcome that for most trials. And again, some of this is just dependent on
How much of an outlier is Endeavor compared to other health systems across the country as becoming it sounds like Endeavor is positioning itself to at least try to become a national destination center for clinical trial excellence. Is this kind of common or uncommon as you try to gain market share far beyond the immediate kind of geographic area of your health system?
so I think it is uncommon goal. I mean, I think a lot of places in the country, are really just they're not as interested in providing cutting edge care. They're kind of happy with the standard, and they will adopt practices as they become more routine. I think our positioning is we really want to offer really the cutting edge, outstanding, care on top of the great care that people already receive here. And so I think that as a primary motivation, it distinguishes us. I think our nimbleness, and one of the things I didn't really talk about was what things are we doing to facilitate the process?
Mhm.
One of the things that we do in research, no matter where you are, is we kind of hurt ourselves because you want a trial. Let's say I'm at, the classic academic center. It usually takes over a year to get a clinical trial approved at your institution. And that's, through the institutional review board, the study reviews, before that's actually up and going. And by that time, a lot of people have already passed you up. And a lot of times you've already missed a lot of patients that could have benefited from that. So as an example, our goal is that by the time a physician investigator says, hey, I want to start a study, we want to have that up and rolling within 30 days. It's an aggressive goal. I think if we want to become really the leading trial and translational science destination in the country, that's what we're going to really have to do to be looked at and viewed as a preferred partner.
So, Brian, we're approaching the end of this podcast episode. I'd like to ask you a kind of broad concluding question. Endeavor wants to, start a clinical trial and have it up and rolling within 30 days. You potentially have an entire nation full of possible future clinical trial participants who may be getting lab specimens or imaging drawn or done remotely across the United States from non-Endeavor Health providers. You're having lots of different data sources and a very ambitious timeline to reconcile all this data. From a data perspective, what advice do you give to other health systems or perhaps to yourself a few years ago to overcome some of the technical challenges or technological challenges that are involved in getting to where Endeavor Health wants to be?
I think it's partnering with several things. I think that having an internal partnership with your IT department, right? All of this is going to be ultimately based on getting that data in an efficient manner. I think parallel processing. So we're so used to going from A to B to C, but we want ABC to be happening all simultaneously. Becoming efficient in how we look at trials and getting them up and rolling. The IRB should be working with the compliance, which should be work. So it all has to happen simultaneously, and
Mm-hmm.
most places are, still sequential. I
Mm-hmm.
think when it comes to data, again, a lot of this is going to depend on the type of study. But as you're alluding to, we just have that complexity to get images in, et cetera. So establishing those secure sites to protect patient information, to get that information in a reliable way that you can trust and that can be then included in the studies is also important. And that sounds simple, right? I mean, these concepts are like, you got data, you want it, and we got to bring that in. But there's a lot of work that has to go on behind the scenes and foundation to make that happen. But again, because clinical trials, we don't want to increase risk to patient, and we want to limit that risk as much as we possibly can. And so one of those risks cannot be that we leak that information outside or that it was compromised in some fashion. So having those necessary guardrails in place is also.
Brian, thank you so much for joining us today. I really appreciate your participation.
Thank you. Thank you.
And for our listeners, this has been Brian Helfand at Endeavor Health, the Associate Chief Scientific Officer.